All right, hello everyone. My name is Amy Dunlap. As she mentioned, I am a horticulture extension agent at the UT TSU Extension office here in Davidson County. And I mostly focus on residential and consumer horticulture because that's what we have here in Davidson County. And as you heard, I'm also lucky enough to be the coordinator for our Master Gardener program. If you don't know anything about that, that's about 40 hours of horticulture education. So you learn a lot. There's no prerequisites to be a part of the program. And then our aim is for you to take that 40 hours of learning and give it back to the community through 40 hours of educational volunteer work. So not only does it help you hone your skills and everything you learned throughout the class, it helps you also give back to the community through a number of different projects and project gardens that we have across Davidson County. So as an extension agent, one of my main jobs is being a liaison for all the research and information that comes out of the University of Tennessee. So it's my job to get it from the university to community members like yourselves here in Davidson County. One of the educational programs that's taking place across the state of Tennessee, alongside similar programs across the nation, is our Tennessee Smart Yards program. So that's what I'm here to present to you on tonight. It is a UT Extension-led program alongside a number of different agencies across the state, including Metro Water Services here in Nashville. So Julie Burbelia with Metro Water was supposed to be your speaker, but she and I work in conjunction on this program together, so I'm here tonight to give it to you. I'll start by explaining what is a smart yard. The way that we define it is a yard that's in balance with the local environment for the benefit of both humans and the ecosystem as a whole. This is an important distinction because we often emphasize what's best for the environment, but when we do that, it's not always a long-term option because humans, we have our values in mind, usually at the top tier. So we want to be able to combine the intersection of what works for us and what works for our environment. And I think you'll find often that what works best for the environment is what works best for us because we are a part of the ecosystem as a whole. We're not isolated and we're not separated. We play an active role in the impacts that we have on the environment. I want to emphasize too, we say smart yard, but you don't have to have a large space to officially certify as a smart yard. A yard can technically mean a business space, an office park, a school, a community, your yard, or even a balcony. We had a graduate student that worked with Dr. Ludwig who got this program started, who actually certified their balcony. So if you live in an apartment or a small space, you can still implement a number of these programs into the way that you interact with the environment. So I like to include this slide here because I said Tennessee Smart Yards is about what works here in Tennessee in our state, but there's a number of what I call sister programs working along throughout the Southeast and throughout the nation that all have the similar goal of environmental stewardship in mind. So I'm a University of Florida grad, and I'm super proud that University of Florida was actually the pilot program for this with Florida Friendly Landscaping. That's kind of where we mimicked our program off of. And I like to include this because it shows that we aren't operating alone here in Tennessee. It can feel sometimes isolating or like we're not having an impact, but I like to show people that there's so many other people across the country that have the same goal in mind, and we're all working together to do it. So the main overarching goal of Tennessee Smart Yards is actually to protect our waterways and to keep pollutants out of our waterways. So up here on the slide right now is a picture of Davidson County, and all the lines that you see, those are our waterways, our streams, our creeks, and our rivers. And unfortunately, everything that you see in red is something that's already been polluted. So not only do we want to backtrack on this, we want to keep pollutants out of our waterways. And that's where you all come in and what this Tennessee Smart Yards program seeks to address.
Do you have that map that labels those streams?
I don't have one on hand that labels them, but I'll try to find one, and then when I do, I can send it out to you all.
If you go to the TDEC website, their water quality website, they have those interactive maps. You can go in and actually pull up the exact pollutants segments of the creeks.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Joanne.
exactly. Any questions you have, I'll send resources afterwards if I don't have them. So then this is a map of the entire state of Tennessee as a whole. We have about 60,000 miles of waterways, and about 4,000 miles of those have already been marked as impaired by developed land. So here in Davidson County, we're mostly residential, so these pollutants are coming from us, from our streets, from our driveways, from our cars. And the pie graph that you see up on the screen is a list of all the different pollutants that come from urban sources. I include this at the beginning of the presentation because at the end, we're going to go back and look to see how each of our principles through the Tennessee Smart Yards program addresses and tries to get rid of one or more of these different pollutants. So we'll come back to that at the end, but the whole program is kind of designed to mitigate the risk of these pollutants that are up on the screen. So the way that Tennessee Smart Yards is programmed and the way that I'm here is to get you all to certify officially your yard as a smart yard. We designed it on the basis of 9 principles of environmental stewardship. So we define inches as actions that you will take. So what do you get when you get 36 inches? You get a yard. So once you've accomplished 36 inches, you will tick off as officially a Tennessee Smart Yard. It's interesting because we actually have a total of 72 inches, so you only have to get half of those to reach that mark. And that goes to show that everyone can have a Tennessee Smart Yard the way that works for them. So no 2 yards have to look the same or have to be exactly the same to accomplish the status as a Tennessee Smart Yard. And I think many environmentalists or horticulturalists, when they're doing this presentation, you'll realize that you probably already do a lot of these actions. If you're out in your yard and you're already doing sustainable practices, you'll probably see that you're well on your way to being a Tennessee Smart Yard if you're not already. And a lot of them are fairly simple too. We want to emphasize that it's doing more with what we have. It's not trying to get you to go out and purchase things or make major modifications. We want to keep things realistic for people with the resources that they have available to them. So our first principle, and arguably one of the most important, is the right plant, right place principle. A part of my job is farm visits, site visits, diagnostics for homeowners. And I get called out to houses often because people are always thinking that some biotic factor, some pest or disease is tearing down their plants, when more times than not, it's actually a result of the environment putting stress on the plant, often because it hasn't been put into the right place for it to thrive. So you want to really be mindful about what you're doing and the longevity of that, what it's going to look like 10 years down the line and 20 years down the line. It's much easier to do the work now that's going to lead to something long-term than to go back and try to change it. So trees that are much too large for their space, plants that aren't getting enough water, all these are considerations that you want to have. So we ask people to lay out your landscape objectives. Are you someone that wants to host guests? Are you someone that wants to attract wildlife? These are the questions that we prompt you with when getting started on certifying your yard. I always suggest also sketching the long-term goals for your space and assessing the site conditions that you have. Do you get sun or shade in your yard? What direction does your house face? All these are really important considerations when putting the right plant in the right space, because it might look nice, but ultimately if you're putting something in the wrong spot, you're putting more and more inputs into that plant over time, which also equates to more money over the long term. So a big part of this is incorporating native plants into your yard and removing invasives. So natives are going to be a host plant to a number of different insects and wildlife that are native to Tennessee. And like I said, they're going to require fewer inputs in the form of nutrients and water in the long term. And you can also use the existing vegetation that you have. So don't feel like you have to go to Bates Nursery and pick up all these new plants to be able to be a smart yard. We want to be able to foster what's already existing there. The next principle is all about managing your soils and mulches. So it all starts with the soil. This is the way that we make sure our plants are healthy In order for our plants to be healthy, we have to start with the soil. So we want to make sure that we're not only are we not letting pollutants get into our soil, but we're not compacting our soil by taking out all the air and the nutrients and the water. So this is something that we encourage people to do, is use natural mulches. So a layer of about 2 to 3 inches of mulch helps to protect your soil from pollutants and compaction along the way. And again, you don't have to go buy anything fancy for this. You can use things that your yard already provides, whether it be natural organic matter off the tree, leaves, things like that. Compost that you make can all be used to protect and cover your soil. And I'll talk a little bit later about the importance of soil testing. Yes?
What about the pine needles? Are those okay for the mulch?
Yes, yeah, pine needles are great for the soil as well.
Okay. Does that keep some plants, if they're too close to the plant, does that kill some of the plants, or not really?
They can be too close if they're rubbing up, especially with trees. You want to leave 2 to 3 inches away so they're not like touching the plant or transferring any. Because sometimes the soil can harbor diseases, and it often does. So that gives it some space away from the base of the tree.
Okay.
So reduce, reuse, recycle has been a popular phrase for a really long time, but it's for good reason. We really want to encourage people to use what they have on hand. So it takes about 500 to 1,000 years for 1 inch of the soil to develop. So something that you can do to maintain your soil and to foster it is to compost, like I mentioned, using things that you already have. Another example of this is what we call grass cycling. So it's been shown that if you leave your grass clips after you mow the lawn, long term that can result in 20% less fertilizer use per year. So there's an advantage to that, and like I said, it works for us. It's less work for us having to go collect all your grass cycling, your grass pieces. Another important thing is leaving your grass to a certain height. So this ultimately helps the plant grow and gain energy, and reduces the amount of water that it's going to need later on. So this whole program is about our waterways, and it's about keeping pollutants out of the waterways. That's why water efficiently is one of our 9 principles. And actually, a yard that waters efficiently is designed to just rely on rainfall. So we really don't want to do any extra irrigating if we can avoid it. We recommend about 1 inch, or plants need about 1 inch of water per week to be able to live, or that's an average. And so something we recommend people get is a rain gauge. This is essentially just something that helps you track the amount of rainfall you're getting per week. So you only have to irrigate the difference. If you're getting 1 inch a week, you don't have to irrigate at all. Rain barrels are another really popular thing coming up, where you collect rainwater and then you use that to irrigate your yard. But this also goes back to right plant, right place. You know, if you're choosing the right plants, native plants that have deeper root systems are going to require less watering down the line as well. So I mentioned on the previous slide, keep your grass high. A lot of HOAs don't like this one, and sometimes, like you were saying, the governing bodies can be against us when we're trying to do some of these things, but we really want to keep our grass higher because it helps to build its root system and needs less water. 2 to 3 inches. I mean,
HOAs get mad.
Right. So it's not always realistic when you live in a neighborhood that requires it, but it is something that that it's a sustainable practice long term.
So aren't some of like the furniture, the stuff that we put on our lawn, like the green lawn and all that stuff, isn't that like kind of really a pollutant anyway, as far as, doesn't it kill a lot of the bugs and things like that we need to?
Yes. So a lot of pesticides are non-selective. So when you're adding any additive, whether it's a pesticide or not, it's really important to pay attention to the ingredients that are going into it and to do the research ahead of time before you put it on your lawn. I often encourage, homeowners not to treat things sometimes because there's not a large economic loss, that might be necessary on a commercial scale, like a large scale farm. But often pest problems will come and go anyway, so I often ask homeowners to really think about if interfering with chemicals or something artificial is necessary in their yard. So it can have adverse effects.
People don't realize that those are insecticides, you know, they just, oh, it's making my lawn green.
And that's why it's, you know, there's a big movement right now, not even to have lawns, but, you know, permaculture, making sure the plants in your yard are serving a function. That's a really important thing too, and it's a part of Tennessee Smart Yards, but we're kind of trying to work with what's available to us, and the reality is most people have lawns right now. So we're working with that, but ultimately it would be great if grass and turf grass, you know, that needed a lot of input like this was something that we could minimize.
So you said that Metro Water is one of your responsibilities. So is there any, do you see in the future, has anybody talked about it with them, for them to change the requirements for gray water systems? Because right now, it's only new houses that can have those put in, and they're so efficient. I mean, especially for somebody who uses, you know, organic soap, and I mean.
I can't speak to those systems. I'm not too knowledgeable about Metro Water and what they're currently doing, but I will give you Julie Berbelia's contact at the end of this. She actually works for Metro Water, and she'd probably have the answer to that question, or I'll send an email after and try to address that to you, because I'm not too familiar on the policy there.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions here? So this kind of goes back to your question about using fertilizer appropriately. So this is really an example of something that too much of a good thing can actually be a bad thing. So when we put fertilizer on our plants and in our yards, often the water can take the excess into creeks and waterways, which promotes the growth of algae. And when there's too much algae and it starts to decompose, it sucks the oxygen out of the water, and that's oxygen that plants and other wildlife need to live. Too much fertilizer too can also be detrimental to the plant, so it can actually weaken the plant and cause it to be more susceptible to pests and diseases. I try to be mindful with, you know, even though commercial companies can provide us factual information, I often tell people to be wary of that, because when you're reading a fertilizer website or a pesticide website, you should keep in mind that they're trying to sell you a product at the end of the day. And the reality is most well-established trees and bushes do not need a lot of additional fertilizer added to the soil. And this, I'll talk here a little bit about soil testing. So if you've ever been to a UT presentation or you've interacted with Extension, you know the biggest thing that we recommend people do before making any landscape changes is getting your soil tested. So here in Tennessee we have predominantly clay soils, but not only from the test will you find out the soil pH, which does influence the way that the plants can uptake nutrients, it also gives you a pretty in-depth nutrient profile. So you know what you're missing and what you're lacking, and you can only add that. You're not just going to blanket add nutrients that are already there in the soil. So that's a really important thing to do. The UT Soil Plant and Pest Center, luckily enough, it's here in Nashville, will soil test for $15, and we really recommend it because it only has to be done every 2 to 3 years, depending on what you're looking to do.
Just a point about the fertilizer. It also kind of makes the plant grow faster and artificially, so it kind of, they lose their resiliency. So especially native plants that make naturally more resilient. And so that's, if you're using fertilizer, just be aware of that and do it sparingly, because then it'd be less likely to withstand drought and all that.
Absolutely. That's also a really good point. We're no longer recommending people fertilize new trees because what that encourages the root system not to expand any farther. When it has all its needs right with it, it's not going to seek out a deeper root system, and in the long term it's going to cause issues with the plant. So manage yard pests. I think this is another reason I'm employed truthfully, because most of the calls that I get at the office is not what is this pest, it's how do I get rid of this pest? What do I spray? Or I've already sprayed and it hasn't worked. So if you have holes in your leaves on your plants, congratulations, you are feeding some species that is a part of the larger food web. So I want to let people know that it's not only unrealistic to seek a disease and weed-free yard, it's also unwise because a lot of those insects are not necessarily pests and they are necessary because something is out there eating them. A lot of them are even beneficial, so they are eating the insects that we consider pests. So when, going back to pesticides, we're not saying completely never use pesticides again, but we're asking people to more take an approach of what we call integrated pest management. So it's using other methods of pest control, whether it be hand removal, monitoring them, attracting beneficial insects to your yard. So we have something called a trap crop, and that crop is often planted to attract pests away from our cash crop or the plant that we're really trying to grow here. So even the organic and the sustainable or environmental friendly products, they are killing something. So all pesticides are designed to kill something in the environment, and many of them are non-selective. So when you are using them, we're asking people to spot treat. So to know what you're using and also to know what you're treating, because non-selective pesticides will just kill anything that they come in contact with.
Have you noticed the Mosquito Joe now has a sign that says Mosquito Joe, all natural?
Can you expound on that if you know, because people, I have just noticed a complete loss of the fireflies in my neighborhood. I live in Westmead, and everyone's got their Mosquito Joe. I actually have a picture here of Mosquito Joe treating a yard with this mask on, this yellow foggy stuff, and they fog the entire flat lawn of this house. And I'm like, mosquitoes are on the lawn? Mm-hmm. And then now there's no fireflies. And so I'm on the Westmead site going, oh, it's just a kill. Do you know what?
I mean, pest control companies they're supposed to be certified, and they do go through processes on what they spray, but there's often what they're spraying can have, like you're saying, negative effects on non-target species. So they're spraying to get rid of one particular species, and they often can get rid of a number of others, especially our pollinators, which we rely so heavily on. So that's why we're really trying to dissuade homeowners and other people from unnecessarily spraying or from spraying on a regiment. I think it's unnecessary for people to have a monthly, pest control program if they don't really even know what they're spraying for. So I do think that's a huge problem, and that's why we're trying to get education out there about what people are spraying and what their intentions are, because we often don't know the long-term risks.
Do mosquitoes breed on a lawn, a big flat lawn anyway? I mean, why don't I understand why
from what I think, they breed where still water.
There's not, we put like little couple fans in our backyard, and the air is moving.
You know what the best educational piece is?
Mm-hmm.
For children.
No, this is
When we
mosquito
played
jobs.
bluebirds at school, they found out that the bluebirds had to have 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars or bugs, because that's bird baby food. And if we kill those things, then they don't have any food. And those kids would run around protecting the bugs in the schoolyard. And they would take that knowledge home, and when they present it to their parents, it's much more palatable than when I try to talk to them.
Right. My sister-in-law, she lives in California, and she hates spiders. So she regularly gets her, I'm trying to convince her to change her ways too, because she's on a regular spray. Sorry?
Does she like cockroaches?
No.
When that's how I told my daughter, I said, you don't like cockroaches? These wolf spiders, great.
Right, so they're doing the work for us. They have a very important ecosystem service, and they're there for a reason often. So invasive species, that doesn't always apply to, and that's often where pesticides come into play, is trying, at least in the home environment, I mean not necessarily on a crop environment, but it's trying to get rid of invasives. That would be a situation where you need to weigh the costs and benefits. You know, what is causing more damage in the long term, applying the pesticide to a small space or having this large invasive take over our space. So there are situations where we think it might be worth it, but we really want people to be cognizant of it and not just turn to them every time they're having a pest problem. Because the truth is too, pest populations will naturally fluctuate over the course of a year and over the course of multiple years. So usually the problem will often take care of itself, or it won't be significant enough where you necessarily even need to intervene.
I just want to add that Doug Tallamy has a 10-foot rule. He's an entomologist that is a proponent of native plants, and he says, I just practice the 10-foot rule. Say, if there's something eating my leaves, stand 10 feet back and you don't notice it.
Exactly. I feel that way about my houseplants. When I see something feeding on them, I'm so heartbroken because I work to make that plant beautiful, but then I try to reframe it as my plant is providing food for another really important insect. So, you know, try to reframe it in your mind as it's not necessarily a negative thing. You know, it's all about how we think about it. So a big component too is reducing stormwater runoff and its pollutants. So I often tell people, think about your yard and your water as the head of a stream. So it's basically, you know, if it doesn't end up in the soil or if it doesn't end up being in trees, it's ultimately going to end up in our waterways. So it's really important to either have permeable surfaces that are going to be able to absorb the water, and one of those examples is a rain garden. So we encourage people to put rain gardens in their yard to help with runoff that ultimately ends up in our waterways. And trees will actually do this for us as well. So trees will intercept water in the canopy and either reuse it, or it'll end up slowing the velocity that the water hits the soil, and it's not compacted as much. So I do think, you know, there was a statistic, I think, that an extra like 5% or 20% of tree canopy will reduce water by like 5%. I can't quite remember, but trees serve a really important ecosystem service as well. So they will do a lot of the work for us. And making sure to pick up like pollutants, that's what falls under good outdoor housekeeping. So if you have a dog and you let it use the bathroom in your yard, picking it up is not only a polite thing that our HOA wants us to do, that can also harbor bacteria that ultimately ends up in the waterway. So even though it is organic matter, it's not necessarily good for us. It can have negative impacts in the end as well. So providing for wildlife, this is personally one of my favorites and one of, I think, that's the easiest for people to relate to. So it's identifying wildlife that you want in your yard and making sure that you provide the habitat that you want. So if, you know, a plant might be really beautiful, but if it isn't getting eaten by another insect, or it's not drawing anything to it, it's not participating in the larger system. It's basically isolated by itself. It's not offering any service. So native bees or native birds will eat native insects that will eat native plants. So that's why we encourage their use so much, because they are serving a function in the greater good. So we encourage people, you can get points if you have a bird house, if you have a bird bath. You know, just finding habitat plants that are going to attract the insects that you want to your yard, and provide a pollinator habitat, for example. And another thing I mentioned here too is think about the wildlife that's not necessarily attractive to you. That snakes and that spiders. We often don't want them in our yard, but they do serve a really important purpose as well. So not just necessarily the cute things or the things that we find, you know, aesthetically pleasing, but the wildlife as a whole. A lot of people don't necessarily relate to protect water's edge, because you might say, oh, I don't live near water, I don't live near a stream, this one doesn't affect me. But the truth is that it does. And so a lot of, I think about 10% of our waterways or our riparian areas have been deemed impaired. So that means that there's not enough of a buffer there, or the water can't be used for cattle in the area or fish, that it's been damaged to that extent. So what we encourage people to do is have no mow, no fertilizer, no pesticide zones on the banks of rivers. So this can be about 3 to 6 feet, often of native plants. This can help not only with habitat, but also filtering out pollutants before they get into our waterways, and also preventing erosion. So that's also another large problem here as well.
We have a stream in our yard, and we like to go to the stream, and my granddaughter likes to look for rocks and things. So how do you keep it no mow, but also where you don't have to go through lots of unpleasant weeds to get there?
So we often will recommend people put native aquatic plants that are designed to be like in a riparian waterway or in a zone that can take a lot of water. So we have some documentation that's really helpful that recommends certain plants that you can put in that area as well. But often when you mow, it just helps, everything leach into the waterways. So we like to have that buffer zone there. And if anyone else has any input on what they've done in their waterway.
What's an example of some of those plants?
I'm not super familiar because I'm fairly new to Tennessee, but we do have a list of some of the plants.
Is that on your website or?
I will send out, I'll send out the link. Another really good resource for you all is UT Hort. So we have all of our documentation, all of our plant lists, our resources there. And if you just go to the search, you can input one word and all the documentation that UT has for that particular topic will come up. But I know for a fact there is one on aquatic plants.
And you can have the black willow is a good one, and red, what kind of dogwood? Silky dogwood.
And we're talking about plants.
I know. No, bear with me. You're talking about flowers, then you're saying, instead of shrubs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, because the silky dogwood is a shrubby plant. It's not a tree. It's not a tree like the
But are they like
dogwood.
4 or 5 feet tall?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it takes a little while to get there. But those will grip, and what I'm thinking is, instead of having a ground plant, you can have a few of those, and that holds the soil, and then you can walk in between them. That's why I'm saying. So, yeah. So anyway, those are two of the trees and shrubs that do it, and also there's a really pretty mallow, that marshmallow.
Yes, that's a good idea.
That's a really nice one.
Marshmallow.
Marshmallow.
Yeah. I started trees. We have trees along the bank, like a birch and a willow, and they do real well. But our creek will get, like if we have a hard rain, it floods very quickly, and it's knocked over stone benches, so that's always a challenge. I can't even tell you how many plants we've lost.
There's grasses and mosses that can go in there that'll make it more spongy. But the problem is, a lot of times we have the bush honeysuckle, and that's bad for it. It doesn't do that. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff you can do for that.
And you can check with like the USDA and RCS. They might have a program that could come out and do some work for you. And, you would match the cost, but it would be a lot cheaper. They'll come out and do some vegetation. They might even restructure the stream a little bit so it's not flooding. And they do a lot of things.
That would be a lot. You know which stream I'm talking about that runs our neighborhood.
No, the Natural Resources Conservation Service has lots of homeowner programs.
They really do, so that would be worth checking into as well.
So if you don't spray or whatever, what's wrong with the runoff as far as at your
Sorry?
If you don't spray or use any pesticides whatsoever, what is detrimental about the runoff?
Well, it doesn't, even though you don't necessarily spray, people in the nearby area might spray so that water can easily go through their yard as well. But it's not always just pesticides or fertilizer, it can also be animal waste. Even sediments are a large pollutant as well.
That is
So
the
Yeah,
number
no,
one pollutant in the country.
If it goes down fast, it'll why you want to have the native grasses, because they go really deep, the roots go really deep, so that it makes it more spongy. But the other roots are at the surface, and so the dirt gets washed away. That's silt.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's also, you know, like she said, it's the #1 pollutant.
A lot of people think soil is, you know, just so sweet and innocent, and it's not always.
It's not always.
Would a compost
It's not
pile,
managed.
Very
would a compost pile about 10 feet away from a creek be a problem?
Especially if it's contained, you know, if you have a barrier around it, I don't see it being an issue. But if it's just allowed to be, like, you know, if it's not well contained, it could be an issue.
What is it? What was it?
Or compost pile?
So if you do decide to go through the program, I want to say that it is completely free. It's online and you can do it self-paced on your own. And this was a really high-level overview of our program, just to get people interested and to get them started in certifying their yard. But each of the principles I talk about has an accompanying video that's 30 minutes to an hour. So it goes much more in depth than what I've said. I've just given you kind of the synopsis of each of the principles. But again, you can do it at home on your own. This is the link and the website you'll go to go ahead and get started. Included with that is our Tennessee Yardstick workbook. So it helps prompt you and helps get you started. I'm sure a number of you have already started doing some of these inches and these actions. So you're probably not that far off from getting your yard certified as a Tennessee Smart Yard. And this is on a later slide, but so you can also, to keep track of your the points that you've already accumulated, we have an interactive Excel spreadsheet that helps you monitor everything that you've already done and figure out what you can do to officially reach those 36 inches. And we also encourage you to go, you know, beyond that as well. You know, not only do we want you to do more, but we also want to recognize what you're already doing. You know, we want people to be a leader in their communities and for people to ask questions like, what's that smart yard sign? What does that mean? So not only do you have a positive impact on the environment, but you have the opportunity to be a positive impact on your neighbors and the communities that you live in as well. So as I mentioned early on, these are some of the pollutants and alongside them the different principles that we have to try to either directly or indirectly reduce the likelihood that they're ending up in our waterways. When you certify, you can email me, I'm the Davidson County Extension Agent. If you're in another county, you can email your extension agent. But you do get a certified Tennessee Smart Yard sign to put out in your yard. And you also get one of Metro Water Services Music City Gold fertilizer as well that they produce on their own from biosolids that they make at the facility. So I'm very proud to be Davidson County because we currently have the most smart yards in the entire state. We have 63 and we're at 31%.
Yeah, I noticed it's blue too.
Yes. But that might not hold for long because Knox County and Hamilton County are currently doing the Nuga Knox Challenge. So they're in a competition right now to see who can get the most smart yards in a short amount of time. And I don't want our title being threatened. So everyone in this room, I really would challenge you to start embarking on that journey to certify your yard. And I know there's a number of other certifications.
Do you get more, like, if we got schools to do this, because those are large spaces, do we get more credit?
That's what we would love. So the ultimate goal is to take this program to schools, to government entities, to offices, and that's what we have. We don't necessarily get more credit for it, but that would be ideal. We have something called our Tennessee Smart Communities. So that's the next step, and it's certifying entire communities as being smart communities. So this can be geographical, it can be a neighborhood, but it could also be a business. You know, they don't necessarily have to be right next to each other. So our goal is to have entire smart yard communities. And that's more in development. I don't know that we have any right now, but I think Franklin is going to be a pilot for that. Their downtown or their city area is going to be a pilot for a smart community. So, we do really encourage Davidson County. I would hate for us to be dethroned by Knox County or Hamilton County. So, tell your friends and spread the word. Anyone is welcome to reach out to me. This is my email here. I also have a number of business cards. I'm happy to provide any resources that you need. I don't know everything, but I do feel like I have a huge connection, through the university. So I do know people who know everything. And I'm happy to hear.
You could come and do stuff for HOAs?
I have done neighborhood presentations for HOAs and different neighborhood groups. Any organization that asks us to come, we're happy to present for them, whether or not it's on Tennessee Smart Yards or another program as well. I'm more than happy to do it, especially we also have the Master Gardener Speakers Bureau, and they give free presentations at different local libraries, so their calendar is on their Master Gardener website, but they give a number of different, more gardening specific programming and things that you can do with that. Does anyone have any other questions? Well, I want to thank you for hosting me here. This is a program that I'm really excited about to do alongside Davidson County residents. I'm very new here, but I'm learning myself, and I really would love to help you accomplish this as well. Yes.
I have one more question, and that is regarding a pest.
Okay, I'm happy to help.
I had, when I first bought my house, I had a lawn, and it's been turned so happily into a beautiful moss lawn, completely just beautiful. And as of about a month and a half ago, I have a mole, and it's torn up the whole dang thing. The only thing I've done different in my yard was this year, I used the pine needle mulch around, and now there's these big hole, and it's just half the moss is actually just now dirt now, and I said, I looked up, but they don't like coffee grounds. Well, coffee grounds all over. I was just like, do you have any idea what to do with those kind of? I have snakes. I love snakes. I've got everything you can possibly imagine.
I also get a ton of questions about moles, voles, armadillos, ground squirrels. So the first thing I would say, and they're all very annoying. Do you know what's a mole specifically?
Yeah, I do, because it has to, I know what a mole is.
Okay.
It's not a gopher.
So a lot of the deterrents, the chemicals, the smells, the odors, honestly are not effective. Putting mothballs, there's a lot of things that are recommended that are not really going to help in the long term. They're hard to catch. Usually the most effective thing isn't something homeowners want to do, it's to trap it or to put one of those physical spikes in the hole so it eventually comes in contact with it, but it's not always.
How to trap something like that?
There's a number of different, pest control companies or wildlife companies who you can pay to trap them, and some will even relocate them. They don't necessarily kill them, but they relocate them, but there's no guarantee that they don't come back again. They're very persistent, and I've noticed that's a big problem for a lot of people.
Do they move on, or are they move in forever?
A lot of them will make themselves comfortable for a long time, or they'll just expand their terrain into other areas too.
What about grubs?
Sorry?
Lawn grubs.
How to get rid of them? I am not, I'm not too familiar with what to.
That's what they feed on. That's why they're there, is they're eating the grubs. The grubs never bothered me.
I don't mind a few, but they're actually killing the lawn at this point. We got so many.
Maybe you can invite her home.
There we go. We'll have a little Facebook exchange group for farming.
I thought I would get mostly plant questions in this job, but I think I get mostly mole questions and bowl questions. So, no, they're a huge problem, and they're so hard to get rid of.
I've never had it.
Yeah, they are very persistent. Usually physical measures are things that work best, keeping them out or trapping them, but I wouldn't waste money on sprays and deterrents and things like that.